The Itsy Bitsy Spider, a childhood rhyme, innocent and familiar, sung in soft voices as children gather close. The words slip through generations like a gentle lullaby, simple and sweet. You might remember it, a tiny spider climbing up a drain pipe, the rain washing it down, the sun drying the rain, and the spider climbing again. A cycle of struggle and triumph in miniature, told in easy rhyme. But beneath those words lies something far older, something more tangled than the rhyme suggests. Imagine, just for a moment, that this tiny spider is not so innocent, that its climb is endless, unrelenting, and watched by eyes unseen, that the rain which washes it away is not a soft shower, but a downpour that drowns everything it touches, that the sun's warm rays are not a gentle comfort, but a fleeting reprieve before the next flood. This story you are about to hear takes place in a world very much like your own, a quiet suburban neighbourhood with neat houses and tree-lined streets. But beneath the surface of this everyday scene lurks a slow, creeping darkness. It starts with the rain, heavy and constant, flooding the streets and creeping up the walls of one unassuming home. It starts with a sound, tapping, scratching, as if something small is moving beneath the floorboards. It starts with a family caught between the comfort of home and the creeping dread of what they cannot see. The Itsy Bitsy Spider is climbing. The rain had started early that afternoon, a soft patter at first, barely noticeable against the hum of everyday life. But by evening it had grown into a relentless downpour, drumming against windows and pooling in gutters. The sky was a leaden grey, thick with clouds so heavy they seemed to press down on the earth itself. Inside the house on Maplewood Lane, the family gathered quietly in the living room. The walls, usually bright and warm, with a soft glow of lamps and family photos, now felt cold and shadowed. The air smelled faintly of wet wood and damp earth, as if the rain had seeped inside, along with the wind. Emma sat curled on the couch, her fingers tracing the embroidered spider on her throw pillow. She thought of the nursery rhyme her mother had sung to her when she was little, the one about the itsy bitsy spider who never gave up. No matter how many times the rain washed it away, it was a story of resilience, her mother had said, a reminder that even the smallest creatures could find the strength to climb again. But tonight, as the rain hammered the roof and water crept closer to the house's foundation, Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something was off. The tapping she'd heard earlier, soft and distant, like tiny claws clicking against wood, hadn't stopped. It echoed faintly from somewhere beneath the floorboards, a persistent rhythm that pulsed beneath the house like a hidden heartbeat. She glanced toward the hallway leading to the basement door. The crawl space below had always been a place of shadows and secrets, a dark underbelly the family rarely spoke about. But now it felt alive, waiting. Emma shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The itsy bitsy spider was climbing, and this time it wasn't just a rhyme. The house seemed to hold its breath as the storm raged outside. Rain hammered relentlessly against the windows, and the gutters groaned beneath the weight of water rushing through them. The streets outside were slick and shining, reflecting the dull orange glow of street lamps that fought to pierce the grey gloom. Emma stood by the window, watching the floodwaters slowly inch toward the porch. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and ozone, the kind of scent that lingers just before a storm breaks open completely. Her husband, Mark, moved silently behind her, his footsteps muffled on the threadbare carpet. He had always been practical, the steady hand when things grew uncertain, yet tonight even he seemed unsettled, his usual calm replaced with a tightness around his eyes. "We should check the drains again," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the swollen gutters. "If they back up, the basement's going to flood." Emma nodded, but didn't turn away from the window. Beneath the sound of the rain, she thought she could still hear it, the faint tapping and scratching, like tiny claws against wood. It was the kind of noise that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, the kind that whispers of things best left unseen. Upstairs, their children slept fitfully, shadows flickering across the walls as the storm threw wild shapes against the windows. The house was full of quiet tension, the kind that settles when nature itself seems to pause and watch. Emma pulled her cardigan tighter and stepped back from the window. "It's just the rain," she told herself, but deep down she knew it was more than that. The Itsy Bitsy spider was climbing, and this time it was not just a rhyme told to soothe children before sleep. It was a slow, steady menace, weaving its web beneath their home, inching closer with every drop of rain. The clock ticked softly on the mantel, its steady rhythm a fragile counterpoint to the storm's relentless assault. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, bending branches until they scraped against the siding with a hollow, mournful sound. Inside, the house creaked and sighed, as if settling into the weight of the night and the flood that threatened to consume it. Emma moved cautiously through the rooms, her footsteps muffled by thick rugs and damp carpets. The once bright walls now seemed dim and shadowed, the colours muted by the storm's heavy grey light filtering through rain-streaked windows. Each room held its own memories, the laughter of children, the soft murmur of family dinners. But tonight, those memories felt distant, like echoes in a place that had grown strange and unfamiliar. She paused by the basement door, running her fingers over the chipped paint. Below lay the crawl space, a dark hollow beneath the house that none of them visited often. It was a place of forgotten things, old pipes, tangled wires, and the spider webs that clung stubbornly to the corners. The tapping was louder here, clearer, as if the small creature was calling out from the depths. It was rhythmic, insistent, a sinister melody hidden beneath the house's heartbeat. Emma's skin prickled with unease. She thought of the nursery rhyme, the itsy bitsy spider climbing up the spout, washed away by the rain only to climb again. But what if this spider never stopped climbing? What if it grew stronger with every wash, every flood? Her mind drifted to stories she'd heard in childhood, tales of creatures lurking just out of sight, patient and waiting, crawling through cracks and shadows, hungry for a way inside. A sudden noise startled her, a soft, scuttling sound from the hallway. She turned sharply, but saw nothing. The house held its secrets close tonight. Emma swallowed hard, and backed away from the basement door. Somewhere beneath her feet, the spider was climbing. The storm had been relentless for days now. Outside the windows of the Jenkins home, on Maplewood Lane, the world was a blurred wash of grey skies and endless rain. Water pooled in the gutters and ran down the faded siding, tracing dark streaks along the walls. The driveway was slick with mud, and the garden was sodden. Leaves bowed under the weight of persistent droplets. Inside, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. The familiar sounds of suburban life were muffled by the rain, and every creak and drip seemed amplified in the enclosed space. Emma Jenkins sat at the kitchen table, a mug of lukewarm tea clutched between her hands, eyes distant as she listened to the storm's steady rhythm. Her husband, Mark, was in the garage, trying once again to clear the blocked drains that threatened to flood their basement. He worked with a grim determination, frustration creasing his brow as the water refused to recede. Their children, Ellie and Sam, were upstairs, Ellie curled up with her spider plush, eyes wide and unsettled, and Sam staring out his bedroom window, mesmerised by the sheets of rain falling past. Emma's thoughts drifted to the nursery rhyme her mother used to sing, the Itsy Bitsy spider climbing up the waterspout, washed away by rain, only to climb again. It had always been a simple story of perseverance, but now it felt like a warning. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something unseen to awaken. A faint tapping echoed from somewhere beneath the floorboards, slow, deliberate, like the rhythm of tiny claws against wood. Emma's heart skipped. She glanced toward the basement door at the end of the hallway, half expecting it to creak open on its own. Mark's voice called from the garage, sharp and urgent. "Emma, you need to see this." She rose, setting her mug down carefully, and moved toward the door. The floodwaters outside were rising faster than anyone had anticipated. The rain showed no sign of stopping, and the drains had backed up, leaving pools of dark, murky water creeping closer to the house's foundation. Mark stood in the garage, soaked through, his face pale under the flickering light. In his hands was a strange, tangled mass, a cluster of old roots, and something that looked like blackened webbing. "We've got a problem," he said, voice low. Emma stared at the mass, feeling a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The tapping beneath the floorboards grew louder, more urgent. The Itsy Bitsy spider was climbing. The garage was dim and smelled of damp earth and oil. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he held up the tangled mess, thick, blackened roots intertwined with something finer, like threads of ancient spider silk. Emma reached out hesitantly, the coolness of the damp strands sending a shiver up her spine. "What do you think it is?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mark shook his head. "I don't know, but it's clogging the drain worse than anything I've seen before. It's like something's growing in there." Emma's eyes drifted to the basement door, its surface chipped and worn. The house had always had its quirks, old pipes groaning, drafts slipping through cracks, but this felt different, alive in a way that unsettled her deeply. Upstairs, Ellie was clutching her spider plush tighter, her small fingers white with tension. The storm had stolen the usual comfort of bedtime stories and lullabies. Instead, there was silence, an uneasy stillness that wrapped the house like a shroud. Sam stood at his window, watching the water swirl around the base of their street lamp, the light flickering as the rain battered the glass. He didn't notice the shadow that flickered just beyond the tree line, a small, creeping figure that seemed to glide effortlessly between raindrops. Emma forced a smile, trying to ease the growing knot of dread. "We'll get it fixed, Mark. The rain will stop and the drains will clear." But even as she spoke, the tapping beneath her feet grew louder, steady and insistent, like a heartbeat in the darkness. It echoed through the walls, seeping into the very bones of the house. The Itsy Bitsy spider was climbing. The night deepened, swallowing the last hints of twilight as the rain continued its relentless fall. Inside the house, shadows shifted and lengthened, stretching across walls like dark fingers reaching out in search of something. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her tea long forgotten, as she traced the grain of the wood with trembling fingers. The tapping beneath the floorboards had become a constant companion, a rhythmic thrum that she could no longer ignore. It was there in every quiet moment, whispering secrets she could almost understand, but dared not listen to too closely. Mark re-entered the house, dripping wet and exhausted. His face was drawn, eyes heavy with worry. "I cleared as much as I could," he said, dropping the tangled mess into a bucket. "But it's like something's still alive in the pipes, moving." Emma swallowed hard, the chill crawling up her spine. "Moving?" He nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. "I don't know what, but this isn't normal." Upstairs, Ellie's soft sobs broke the silence. Emma hurried to her daughter's room, finding the little girl curled into a ball beneath the covers, clutching her spider plush like a lifeline. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emma asked gently. Ellie looked up, eyes wide and glassy. "The spider won't stop tapping," she whispered. "It's under the floor. It's coming back." Emma's heart clenched. She pulled Ellie close, wrapping her in a warm embrace. But even then, the tapping seemed to echo louder, as if aware of the fear it had sown. Down the hall, Sam lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the storm drummed on the roof. The rain pattered against his window like a million tiny fingers, and in the darkness he imagined the spider's climb. Slow, relentless, impossible to stop. The house was alive with the spider's presence, and there was no escaping the slow, creeping dread. The Itsy Bitsy spider was climbing. Emma lingered in Ellie's room for a moment longer, smoothing the damp strands of her daughter's hair. She wanted to believe it was just a child's fear, something conjured by the storm and shadows. But deep down, the unease settled heavier each minute. Downstairs, Mark checked the basement again, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the peeling paint and cluttered shelves. The air was damp and stale. The scent of mould thickened the cramped space. The tapping was faint, but unmistakable here too, resonating through the floor joists. Mark knelt and pressed his ear to the cold concrete, the sound like tiny legs scurrying across wood. His breath hitched. A sudden movement caught his eye, A faint glimmer near the drain pipe. He edged closer, heart pounding, and saw the webbing glistening wetly, stretched tight like a spider's trap. He shivered, backing away slowly. This was no ordinary spider web. Upstairs, Emma sat beside Sam's bed, trying to calm his restless mind. The boy's eyes darted nervously toward the window, shadows seeming to flicker just beyond the glass. "Storm's almost over," she whispered, brushing his hair back. "We'll be okay." But the night had only just begun, and outside, the rain showed no sign of stopping, and somewhere in the darkness, the Itsy Bitsy spider kept climbing. The hours stretched long into the night, each minute dragging with a weight of unspoken fear. Emma lay awake in bed, the house silent, except for the occasional creak and the relentless patter of rain against the roof. She could feel the presence of the storm seeping into every corner, into the walls, the floors, even her thoughts. Mark was still restless, pacing the living room floor. The drain clog had not improved, and the strange webbing lingered like a dark stain on his mind. He glanced toward the basement door, as if expecting it to open at any moment. Ellie's quiet sobs echoed faintly from her room, a heartbreaking reminder of the night's toll. Emma wished she could shield her children from the unease, but the house held its own secrets, old, tangled and patient. A soft tapping came again, this time from the ceiling above. It was slow and deliberate, like the steady beat of a tiny drum. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Mark stopped pacing and looked up toward the attic hatch, the creaky old door that no one ever dared open. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered. Mark nodded slowly, jaw clenched. "Yeah, something's up there." The attic had always been a place of whispered warnings, a space filled with forgotten things, dust and shadows that moved just beyond sight. Tonight, it felt alive. The Itsy Bitsy spider was climbing once more. Mark grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the attic ladder, each creak of the steps beneath his feet seeming far too loud in the heavy silence. Emma followed closely, heart pounding, as she tried to steady her breath. The house felt colder here, the damp air thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten memories. At the attic hatch, Mark hesitated. The metal latch was cold and stiff as he lifted it, revealing a dark, narrow stairwell that disappeared into shadow. The beam from his flashlight danced across the dusty rafters, illuminating spider webs that glittered like frozen lace in the dim light. "Stay close," he said softly. Climbing carefully, Emma followed, the wood groaning beneath her weight. The attic was small and cramped, filled with old trunks, forgotten furniture, and the remnants of a life once lived. But there was something else here, something that stirred in the corners, hidden beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. The tapping was louder now, echoing off the walls like a slow heartbeat. Mark moved toward a corner where the webbing was thickest, strands stretching between the beams like black veins. Emma's skin prickled. She could feel it, the presence of something watching, waiting. The Itsy Bitsy spider was not just a story anymore. It was here, climbing higher, weaving its web deeper into the house. Suddenly, a cold gust blew through a cracked window, sending a shiver down Emma's spine. The rain's rhythm quickened outside, the storm's fury mounting as if answering some ancient call. Mark reached out, brushing aside the webbing, revealing a small, dark hole in the wall, a hidden crawl space. From within, the tapping intensified, urgent and demanding. The spider was climbing. Mark shone the flashlight into the small dark hole, but the beam was swallowed quickly by the blackness within. The tapping grew louder, a frantic rhythm that made Emma's skin crawl. "Should we check it out?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark hesitated, then nodded. "We need to know what we're dealing with." He reached into the crawl space, fingers brushing against cold, rough surfaces. The webbing clung thickly to the walls, sticky and unnatural. A faint skittering echoed, as if dozens of tiny legs scrambled just out of sight. Emma stepped back, heart pounding. She felt like the house itself was holding its breath. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so deep it pressed against their eardrums. Then a whisper, soft, sibilant, seemed to echo from the crawl space. The sound was almost like a voice, but unintelligible, a language lost to time. Emma's breath hitched. Mark pulled his hand back quickly, face pale. "There's something down there." The rain lashed harder against the windows, the storm's fury, a wild backdrop to the quiet terror creeping through the house. Outside, the water continued to rise, and the Itsy Bitsy spider kept climbing. Emma swallowed hard, fighting the chill that seeped into her bones. "We have to do something," she said, voice trembling. "If whatever this is keeps growing, if the water keeps rising." Mark nodded grimly. "I'll get some tools. We'll try to block it off." But even as he spoke, the house seemed to shudder, as if breathing in the storm's cold breath. The tapping returned, slow, patient, and relentless, like the spider's own heartbeat echoing through the walls. Upstairs, Ellie clung to her spider plush, eyes wide and haunted. "Mom, it's coming," she whispered. Emma knelt beside her daughter, brushing her hair gently. "We'll keep you safe, I promise." But promises felt fragile beneath the weight of the storm, the flood waters inching ever closer, and the spider that would not be stopped. The attic door creaked shut behind Mark as he descended, leaving Emma alone with the tapping, the steady, chilling reminder that the Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The house felt smaller now, tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in under the weight of the storm. The rain hammered relentlessly against the windows, each drop like a pulse in the growing nightmare. Mark returned with a toolbox, the heavy clank of metal echoing through the hallway. He moved methodically, blocking off the basement door with wooden planks and sealing cracks around the drain pipes as best he could. Emma watched, heart pounding, feeling the chill settle deeper. She glanced toward Ellie's room, where her daughter lay wide-eyed, clutching the spider plush like a shield. "Do you think it's really alive?" Ellie's voice was small, barely audible. Emma knelt beside her. "I don't know, honey, but we'll face it together." Outside, the floodwaters crept higher, swallowing the street lights and creeping toward the house. The gutter overflowed, spilling torrents of water down the sides of the home, the sound merging with the spider's tapping, a relentless, unnerving symphony. From the attic, a faint scratching began, slow and deliberate, like nails tracing across wood. Emma and Mark exchanged a glance, the unspoken fear hanging heavy between them. The itsy bitsy spider was climbing still. Emma moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out. The street was a river of dark water, swirling and surging, with a force that seemed almost alive. Trees bent under the wind's assault, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate fingers. She shivered, turning away from the window. The house groaned under the storm's weight, each creak and moan a reminder of its fragile hold against the rising flood. Mark joined her, wiping rain from his brow. "We can't wait much longer. If this keeps up, the basement will flood completely. Whatever is down there, it's going to come up." Emma nodded slowly, her mind racing. "We need a plan." Upstairs, Ellie lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The tapping beneath her room had stopped, replaced by a soft rustling that seemed to crawl through the walls. She hugged her spider plush tightly, whispering, "Please don't come up here." The house was no longer just a home, it was a battleground. Between them, the storm and the creeping darkness that climbed relentlessly through its bones. The itsy bitsy spider was still climbing. The storm showed no signs of abating as dawn's grey light struggled to pierce the heavy clouds. The house, soaked and shivering, stood like a lone sentinel against the rising floodwaters that now lapped hungrily at its foundation. Emma sat at the kitchen table, exhaustion etched deep into her features. The night had been long and restless, filled with strange sounds and shifting shadows. Mark was out back, checking the flood barriers they'd hastily assembled, his face set in grim determination. Ellie and Sam remained upstairs, hesitant to leave their rooms, each haunted by the memories of the night before. The tapping, the scratching, the unshakable feeling of being watched. Emma's gaze drifted toward the attic door, now firmly closed, but somehow more ominous than ever. The webbing stretched just beneath the eaves, glistening with moisture, a silent testament to the spider's persistent climb. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. The house was no longer safe. The spider was no longer just a symbol of childhood rhyme. It was a creeping reality, inching closer with every passing hour. And the rain showed no mercy. Emma stepped cautiously toward the attic staircase, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. The air felt heavier here, thick with moisture and something else, something ancient and watching. The spiderwebs stretched like ghostly curtains, shimmering faintly in the dim morning light, filtering through a grimy window. Emma reached out, fingers trembling, to touch one of the delicate strands. It clung cold and sticky beneath her skin, a reminder that this was no ordinary spider. From somewhere deep within the walls came a soft scratching, barely audible, but persistent. Emma's breath hitched. It was as if the house itself was whispering secrets, secrets it had kept hidden beneath years of dust and neglect. Mark's voice called up from below, breaking the silence. "Emma, come look at this." She hurried downstairs, the sense of dread tightening with each step. Mark was standing by the back door, pointing toward the flooded backyard, where the water had begun to seep through cracks in the foundation. "We're not going to hold it much longer," he said grimly. "If this keeps up, the basement will be underwater by nightfall." Emma nodded, swallowing hard. "And whatever's down there will find its way up." A sudden crash echoed from the attic, and both their heads snapped upward, eyes wide with fear. The Itsy Bitsy spider's climb was far from over. Emma and Mark exchanged a glance, heavy with unspoken worry. The house seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the walls reverberating with a faint sound of tapping and scratching. The storm outside had become a relentless drumbeat, the flood waters inching closer with each passing hour. "We need to check the attic," Mark said, his voice low but firm. Emma nodded, steeling herself. Together they climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking ominously beneath their weight. The attic door loomed ahead, its surface marred by years of peeling paint and tangled cobwebs. Mark reached out, fingers trembling as he lifted the latch. The door swung open with a slow, eerie creak, revealing the cramped space beyond, shadows pooling in corners, dust motes dancing in the flashlight's beam. The webbing was thicker here than ever, a vast, tangled labyrinth stretching between the rafters like a dark, glistening tapestry. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as the faint tapping grew louder, echoing from somewhere deep within the attic's bowels. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of the light, vanishing before they could get a clear look. "Did you see that?" Emma whispered. Mark swallowed hard. "Yeah, something's up here with us." The rains pounding outside seemed to falter, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed down on them like a shroud. The spider was still climbing. Mark stepped cautiously deeper into the attic, the flashlight beam wavering slightly as he scanned the corners and rafters. Emma followed close behind, her senses heightened with every creak and whisper of the old house. The air was thick, almost suffocating, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. The webbing here was impossibly dense, layers upon layers stretching from beam to beam, trapping dust motes and fragments of the past. It shimmered in the flashlight's beam, looking almost alive, as if it pulsed with a slow, sinister rhythm. Emma reached out to touch the edge of the web, and a shiver ran through her. The strands were sticky, cold, and unnaturally strong, clinging to her fingers like living threads. She pulled back quickly, heart hammering. From somewhere deeper in the attic came a faint rustling, like tiny claws scraping against wood. The tapping had stopped, replaced by this new sound, quicker, more urgent. "Mark," Emma whispered, voice trembling. "There's something else here, something moving." Mark nodded slowly, his face tight with concentration. "We need to find the source." They moved toward a far corner where the webbing was thickest. the layers nearly impenetrable. Behind the tangled mass, a small door was barely visible, paint peeling, hinges rusty. It looked like a forgotten cupboard, or perhaps a hidden crawl space. Mark reached out, fingers brushing the latch. The rust gave way with a faint squeal as he pushed it open. Inside was darkness, deeper than the attic, colder than the storm outside, and from within a faint tapping resumed, slow, deliberate, and utterly relentless. The Itsy Bitsy spider was climbing still. Mark shone his flashlight into the small crawl space, but the beam vanished quickly into thick shadows. The air was colder here, damp and stale, carrying the faintest whisper of decay. Emma's breath caught in her throat. From somewhere inside came the tapping again, soft but insistent, like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. It was almost hypnotic, pulling at the edges of her mind, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. "Do you see anything?" Emma whispered, barely daring to breathe. Mark hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing, but it's definitely coming from deeper in." Emma knelt beside the opening, peering into the darkness. Her fingers brushed the webbing that clung to the edges like a veil, and suddenly a faint movement caught her eye, a tiny silhouette darting just beyond the light's reach. Her pulse quickened. The spider was no ordinary creature. It was something else, something old and hungry. The tapping grew louder, almost urgent now, echoing off the cramped walls of the crawl space. "We need to find a way to stop it," Emma said firmly. Mark nodded, gripping her hand. "Before it climbs too high." Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault, water pooling beneath the windows, creeping ever higher against the foundation. The house was drowning, and the Itsy Bitsy spider was climbing still. The dim light from Mark's flashlight barely penetrated the blackness of the crawl space, the walls closing in like a suffocating tomb. Emma's fingers brushed against cold, damp wood and sticky webs, each strand trembling as if alive. The tapping pulsed steadily, a haunting rhythm that seemed to echo within her chest. She swallowed hard, the air thick with an invisible weight that pressed down on her soul. "We need to seal this off," Mark said quietly, voice strained with exhaustion and fear. "If whatever's down here gets loose, it'll find its way everywhere." Emma nodded, heart pounding. She imagined the spider's countless legs crawling through every crack and crevice of the house, weaving its web tighter and tighter around them. Outside, the floodwaters began to lap beneath the doorframe, dark and cold, creeping with a slow but inevitable menace. Mark set to work, pulling boards and old furniture to barricade the opening. Each plank came down with a dull thud, but the tapping never ceased. It was relentless, patient, a quiet torment. As the last board was nailed into place, Emma shivered, feeling the house shift beneath their feet. A low rumble echoed from the walls, the sound of something moving unseen, and through it all, the tapping went on. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The house seemed to hold its breath, every creak and groan amplified by the storm's relentless fury. Emma and Mark worked side by side, fortifying doors and windows as the water steadily crept closer, seeping beneath thresholds and pooling in corners. Inside, the silence between the tapping moments felt heavier, as if the spider itself was waiting, watching their every move with patient malice. Ellie stayed close to her mother, clutching the spider plush tighter than ever, her eyes wide with fear, but also a strange, quiet determination. Sam sat nearby, whispering stories to try and distract himself, but even his voice faltered when the tapping resumed, echoing from the attic ceiling. The house was their fortress and their prison. Outside, the world was drowning, but inside, the Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The floodwaters rose steadily, dark and silent, swallowing the garden and creeping toward the porch steps. Inside, the family's nerves were frayed, the storm's howl a constant reminder that time was running out. Mark checked the basement door again, grim-faced. The last barricades were swelling with water pressure, threatening to burst at any moment. Emma paced the kitchen, her thoughts tangled like the webs in the attic, circling ever closer to the unknown beneath their home. Ellie refused to leave her room, the spider plush hugged tight as she whispered soft prayers against the creeping dread. The tapping noises shifted now, moving from the attic to the drain pipes outside, a slow, rhythmic drumming that echoed through the walls. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting the house into brief, unsettling darkness. When the power returned, a long, dark streak ran down the living room wall, moisture mixed with something darker, spreading like a stain. Emma's breath caught. "It's not just water anymore," she whispered. Mark's jaw tightened. "Whatever's coming up through the pipes, it's not natural." The rain fell harder, louder, and through it all the tapping continued, a steady, eerie heartbeat. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The storm's fury showed no mercy. Outside, the rain pounded against the windows like 1,000 desperate fingers, each drop a cold hammer striking the fragile walls. Inside, the house groaned under the weight of the rising flood waters, which now crept dangerously close to the floorboards. Emma stood by the living room window, watching as the water pooled into small lakes in their once pristine garden. The dark streak on the wall had spread overnight, curling like a sinister vine that defied explanation. It felt wrong, unnatural. Her fingers brushed the spider plush Ellie had left behind on the couch. She felt a shiver run down her spine. From the corner of the room came the unmistakable tapping, now louder and closer, reverberating through the very bones of the house. Mark returned from the basement, his face pale but determined. "The barricades are holding for now, but it's only a matter of time before the water breaks through." Emma nodded, swallowing hard. "We can't just wait." A low creak sounded from above, and both of them glanced toward the attic ceiling. The tapping shifted, rhythm quickening, as if the spider was restless, preparing for its next move. Ellie's whispered prayers grew more desperate, her small hands clutching the plush, as if it were a talisman against the creeping darkness. The house was their refuge, but with every passing moment, it felt more like a trap. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The night had fallen, thick and suffocating, cloaking the house in shadows that seemed to move and breathe. The storm showed no sign of relenting, rain hammering the roof with a furious, unyielding rhythm. Outside, the floodwaters had risen to the porch steps, lapping hungrily at the door frame. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Emma sat on the edge of the couch, clutching Ellie close, while Mark checked the barricades one last time. Each plank groaned under the pressure, soaked and swollen, but still holding. Suddenly, a sharp tapping echoed from the attic, louder and more urgent than ever before. The sound seemed to vibrate through the walls, filling the house with an almost tangible energy. Emma's heart pounded. "It's coming." Mark nodded grimly, gripping a heavy flashlight like a weapon. "We have to be ready." Ellie whispered a frightened question. "Is the spider going to get us?" Emma forced a smile, though her own fear was rising. "We're going to stop it, together." But as the tapping grew into a frantic pounding, the house seemed to groan and shudder beneath them. The floodwaters pressed harder against the foundation, and the night stretched endlessly before them, dark, cold, and waiting. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The hours dragged on, each minute heavier than the last. Outside, the rain battered the house relentlessly, the floodwaters now swirling with a cold menace that seeped through every crack and crevice. Inside, Emma's mind raced, haunted by the tapping that echoed through the walls. A ceaseless reminder of the spider's slow ascent. Mark paced the living room, checking the barricades once more. His face was pale, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and worry. Ellie clung tightly to her spider plush, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity, as if sensing something no one else could. The attic door remained closed, but the tapping from above had grown into an urgent rhythm, like the heartbeat of something alive and ancient, stirring from a long sleep. Emma glanced toward the staircase, her skin prickling with unease. The house felt alive, watching, waiting, as if the very walls were breathing in anticipation. A sudden crack echoed from the basement, sharp and unsettling. Mark froze, then exchanged a grave look with Emma. "We need to check it," he said quietly. Together, they made their way to the basement door, the cold air pressing in like a living thing. The floodwaters had already begun to seep under the door, and the muffled tapping from below was louder than ever. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Mark grasped the door handle, the cold metal slick beneath his fingers. He glanced back at Emma, whose eyes were wide but resolute. Slowly, he pulled the door open, and a rush of damp, cold air spilled into the hallway, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of earth and something far older, something waiting. The basement was a cavern of shadows, the weak beam from Mark's flashlight cutting through the gloom to reveal water pooling across the cracked concrete floor. The floodwaters had invaded, creeping in silently, but with purpose. As they stepped inside, the tapping grew louder, echoing off the stone walls like a sinister drumbeat. Emma's skin prickled as she followed the sound, moving deeper into the darkness. Her flashlight flickered, shadows dancing grotesquely, twisting the familiar into the uncanny. They reached the far corner of the basement, where an old, rusted drain pipe disappeared into the wall. Water dripped steadily from a cracked joint, and tangled in its webbed strands was something small, dark, and restless. Emma swallowed hard. The spider wasn't just in the attic. It had spread, crawling through the veins of the house, climbing its way closer with every drop of water. Mark's voice was barely a whisper. We can't keep running from this. Outside, the storm roared, the floodwaters rising, pressing ever closer. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she peered closer at the tangled mass clinging to the drainpipe. The spider was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Its body glistened wetly, jet black, with legs that moved in a jerky, unnatural rhythm. The faint tapping now seemed to emanate from it directly, a slow, deliberate heartbeat syncing with the pulsing floodwaters around them. Mark stepped forward, his flashlight illuminating the far corner of the basement. The walls, once dry and unassuming, now dripped with moisture, slick with creeping mould, and strange dark stains that spread like veins, pulsing with a life of their own. It was as if the house itself was infected. The spider, a dark seed rooting deep within its foundation. Ellie's voice echoed faintly upstairs, a soft call tinged with fear. Emma's heart clenched. They couldn't stay here long, not with the flood rising and the spider spreading its reach. Mark, we have to find a way to stop it, she said, voice trembling. Mark nodded grimly. I think we're past stopping it. Now it's about containment. The flood water outside crept ever higher, its dark surface broken only by the relentless tapping. The spider's slow, steady march echoing through the house's veins. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The basement air was thick with damp and decay, the faint glow of the flashlight barely pushing back the shadows that clung to every corner. Emma could feel the chill of a rising floodwater seeping into her shoes, cold and unforgiving. The sound of the tapping grew louder, reverberating through the stone walls like the beat of a dark heart. Mark's eyes scanned the room, searching for anything they could use to barricade or slow the creeping darkness. Old wooden crates, rusted tools, and broken furniture lay scattered, remnants of a life before the flood. Emma shuddered as a sudden movement caught her eye, a flash of something skittering just out of clear sight. The spider's reach was expanding, its many legs slipping silently across the slick surfaces, leaving wet, glistening trails in its wake. We need to move, Mark said, voice low but urgent, the waters rising faster than before. Emma glanced back toward the basement stairs. The way out was already half submerged, and with every minute, the house seemed less like a refuge and more like a trap. Ellie's frightened whisper floated down from upstairs. Mom, is it still climbing? Emma's heart ached, but she forced calm into her voice. Yes, baby. but we're going to be okay. The tapping echoed louder, an unyielding rhythm that filled the space, a chilling reminder that no matter what they did, the Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Mark and Emma moved quickly, their footsteps splashing in the cold water as it reached their ankles. The basement seemed to close in around them, walls slick with moisture and shadowed stains that twisted and pulsed like veins beneath the surface. The floodwater whispered against the stone foundation, a slow but unstoppable force pressing inward. Every so often, the tapping echoed, steady, rhythmic, like the slow crawl of something ancient and unyielding. Emma could feel it in her bones, a cold shiver that refused to fade. The spider wasn't just a creature of silken legs. It was something far older, something born of shadow and water, moving through the house like a dark pulse. Mark paused near a broken wooden crate, his breath visible in the chill air. "We need to find a way to get to the attic from down here," he said, eyes scanning the ceiling. "If that spider's coming down through the pipes and walls, it might be using the attic as a hub." Emma nodded, swallowing hard. "We have to stop it before it spreads any further." A sudden drip echoed loudly in the quiet, and Emma's eyes snapped to the source, the cracked drain pipe, leaking steadily. Beneath the dripping water, a thin strand of web shimmered, glistening like a black thread, woven into the very fabric of the house. The flood outside pressed harder, the roar of water against the walls growing louder. The tapping grew in tempo, urgent, relentless. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Mark shifted his flashlight beam upward, catching the faint outline of a narrow hatch tucked near the ceiling, an old access to the attic from the basement side. Dust motes floated in the stale air, disturbed by the sudden movement. The hatch was weathered, splintered in places, but it looked like their only chance. "We'll need to get up there," Mark said, voice low but determined. "If that spider's using the attic as a base, stopping it there might slow whatever's coming." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle on her shoulders. Ellie's soft cries echoed faintly from upstairs, a fragile tether to the family waiting above. The floodwater had now reached their knees, icy and unforgiving, swirling with debris carried from outside. Emma felt the chill bite through her clothes, but adrenaline pushed her forward. With a grunt, Mark pried the hatch open. A rush of stale, musty air spilled into the basement, mingling with the scent of wet earth and something darker, an ancient musk that clung to the house like a secret. They climbed carefully, every creak and groan of the old wooden steps sending shivers down Emma's spine. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat, quickening as it sensed their approach. At the attic threshold, Emma hesitated. The darkness beyond felt alive, watching. Mark glanced back. "We've come this far. We face it here." The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The attic doorway loomed before them, a black maw, swallowing the faint light from the basement below. Mark took a deep breath, then stepped through first, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath his weight. Emma followed, clutching the flashlight tightly as the beam cut through the thick darkness. The attic was vast, filled with forgotten relics and dust-covered memories, old furniture draped in yellowed sheets, boxes stacked haphazardly, and cobwebs thick as curtains in every corner. The smell was heavy, a mix of mildew and something ancient, something primal. The tapping was louder now, echoing from the far side of the attic. Their footsteps stirred up clouds of dust, swirling like restless spirits in the flashlight's beam. Emma's eyes caught a glimpse of something moving, a shadow, flickering near the rafters. She swallowed hard, heart pounding. The spider was here, somewhere in the dark, its slow, deliberate climb, a promise of something worse to come. Mark moved toward a cracked window, rain streaking the glass, floodwaters visible below, pressing like a silent predator. The house groaned and shifted, the flood's relentless pressure evident in every creak. "This is it," Mark whispered. "We find it here." Emma nodded, trying to steady her breathing. Ellie's soft voice drifted from downstairs, a fragile link to the family they were fighting to protect. The tapping filled the attic, an unyielding rhythm that seemed to pulse through the very air they breathed. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Emma's footsteps faltered as she followed Mark deeper into the attic shadows. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and every breath seemed to pull in the damp scent of rain and decay. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever lurked above was aware of their presence and probing for weakness. The piles of forgotten belongings cast grotesque shapes, twisting in the flickering flashlight beam. Emma's eyes caught something, a shimmer of black, just beyond the edge of the light, where the rafters met the ceiling. She held her breath. The spider. It was larger now, its glossy black body glinting with wetness. Its legs moved with a slow, purposeful grace, each step a soft tap that echoed through the attic like a drumbeat. Mark's voice was a low murmur. "It's been here a long time, feeding on this house's fear." Emma felt the weight of those words settle deep in her chest. The spider wasn't just climbing drain pipes or lurking in basements. It was entwined with the house itself, a dark force growing stronger with the storm's fury. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed against the window, rattling the glass and sending a cold shiver through the room. The floodwaters outside hissed and roared, as if demanding more. The spider's tapping quickened, a frenzied heartbeat echoing the rising waters. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Emma's heart hammered as the tapping crescendoed, the spider's rhythm now frantic, desperate. She took a careful step forward, eyes locked on the dark form, weaving through the rafters. It was almost hypnotic, the way it moved, slow but unstoppable, like a shadow made flesh. Mark crouched beside a stack of old trunks, rifling through their contents. "There's something here," he muttered, pulling out yellowed papers and brittle photographs. Records of the house, its history. Emma's breath caught as she realised the spider was no mere creature. It was a manifestation born from the house's darkest moments, the flood, the rain, the endless tapping, all connected to a legacy of forgotten sorrow. A sudden creak echoed through the attic, and Emma spun toward the sound. A loose floorboard shifted beneath her foot, revealing a narrow hatch, an old crawl space, barely visible in the dim light. Mark's eyes gleamed with determination. This might be where it all started. The tapping slowed, as if the spider was waiting, watching, perched on the edge of something terrible. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Emma swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she reached for the hatch. The attic around them felt alive, the weight of years pressing down in every creak and whisper. The tapping had slowed again, eerily patient, as if the spider was holding its breath. Mark helped lift the hatch, revealing a narrow dark tunnel descending beyond. A cold draft seeped out, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of damp earth and something far older, something forgotten. "We have to see what's down there," Mark said, voice steady, despite the unease creeping into his eyes. Emma nodded, steeling herself. The storm outside battered the house, rain hammering the windows, floodwaters pressing ever higher. Somewhere deep in the house's bones, the spider waited, its slow, unyielding climb, a promise of darkness yet to come. They crawled into the tunnel, the flashlight's beam flickering as they descended into the unknown. The tapping echoed behind them, faint but unrelenting. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The tunnel swallowed Emma and Mark whole, the narrow passageway pressing in on all sides as they inched forward. Damp earth crumbled beneath their fingers, the stale air thick with the scent of mould and decay. Each breath was shallow, each step slow, as the light from their flashlight flickered against jagged stone walls, coated with creeping moss. The storm outside raged in muffled roars, the relentless pounding of rain against the house like a distant heartbeat. The floodwaters pressed just beyond the earth, a swelling threat lurking beneath the ground. Emma's thoughts drifted back to the nursery rhyme that had haunted their family for years. The Itsy Bitsy spider climbing the waterspout, washed away by the rain, only to climb up again. The words had always seemed innocent, even comforting, but now, wrapped in the damp darkness of this tunnel, those words felt like a warning. The spider wasn't just a creature, it was a force, a relentless presence, entwined with the house, the flood, and their own lives. Mark's voice cut through the silence, low and steady. "Look at these markings." His flashlight beam illuminated scratches etched deep into the stone, jagged lines resembling spider legs crawling across the wall. Emma ran her fingers over the rough surface, shivers crawling down her spine. Who made these? And why? Mark shook his head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's ancient and angry." The tunnel curved sharply, leading downward into deeper darkness. As they pressed on, Emma's skin prickled with a growing sense of dread. Something waited in the shadows, patient and hungry. The tapping echoed faintly from above, a slow, steady rhythm that resonated through the earth. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The air grew colder as Emma and Mark descended further, each step echoing softly against the stone floor. Moisture dripped steadily from the uneven ceiling, falling in irregular patterns that shimmered in the flashlight's beam like tiny ghosts. The tunnel twisted and turned, its winding path narrowing until it felt as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating and ancient. Emma's heartbeat quickened, a steady drum beneath the louder symphony of the storm outside. The floodwaters pressed just beyond the tunnel walls, their muffled roar a constant reminder of the rising danger. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. The dim light barely pushing back the creeping blackness. Mark paused suddenly, raising a hand to silence her. Up ahead, the walls opened into a wider chamber, a cavernous space that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The floor was slick with a thin layer of water, reflecting the pale beam of their flashlight, like a mirror fractured and broken. In the centre of the chamber lay a large tangled mass of webbing, thick and glistening as if freshly spun. Emma's eyes widened as she noticed dark shapes embedded within the silken threads, fragments of broken wood, bits of debris, and something else. Tiny bones, bleached white, scattered and caught in the sticky lattice. A low tapping sound began again, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the chamber like a heartbeat. The spider was near, lurking just beyond sight. Mark stepped closer, his expression grim. This is where it's been waiting. Emma's skin crawled as the tapping grew louder, faster, an urgent rhythm that filled the air with menace. Somewhere deep in the house, the spider continued its slow, unyielding climb. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The thick webbing stretched taut across the chamber, glistening with moisture and catching the feeble light like a trap spun by time itself. Emma reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the sticky threads. The sensation was cold and slick, like touching a cold breath on her skin. Mark's flashlight flickered, casting jittery shadows that danced along the walls. He moved cautiously, eyes scanning every corner, every crevice where something might lurk. "This place," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "It's like the house's heart, dark, tangled and waiting." Emma nodded, swallowing down a surge of panic. The tapping had slowed, becoming more deliberate, as if the spider was watching their every move. The floodwaters whispered outside the chamber, pressing like a tide against the stone, threatening to breach the fragile boundaries. Suddenly, a shiver passed through the air, a faint vibration that Emma felt through the soles of her feet. The webbing twitched, her breath caught. The spider was near. Mark shone his light toward a narrow crevice in the far wall, where the darkness seemed to pulse and breathe. "Look," he said. "There's something moving." A shadow slid from the crevice, its form indistinct but unmistakably alive. The tapping resumed, louder now, echoing through the chamber like a dark chant. Emma's heart pounded in time with the rhythm. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The shadow emerged slowly from the crevice, revealing a spider far larger than any Emma had ever seen. Its glossy black body gleamed wetly in the flashlight's beam, legs stretching impossibly long as they moved with an unnatural grace. Each tap of its legs against the stone echoed through the chamber like the ticking of a sinister clock. Emma stepped back, heart hammering, a cold sweat breaking across her brow. Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving the creature as it crept closer, its many eyes reflecting the light with a chilling intelligence. The spider's tapping was relentless, a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to seep into Emma's very bones. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a dark lullaby that threatened to pull her into an abyss of fear. Outside, the storm battered the house with renewed fury, rain pelting the windows and floodwaters surging ever higher. The house groaned in protest, as if the spider's presence was feeding off the chaos, growing stronger with every drop of rain. Emma forced herself to breathe steadily, her mind racing for a way out. The spider paused, its front legs raised in a slow, deliberate motion, an unspoken warning. Mark whispered, "We can't stay here. We need to find a way to stop it." Emma nodded, eyes locked on the spider's slow, steady climb up the walls and ceiling. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The spider disappeared into the shadows above, vanishing into the maze of rafters and hanging webbing that crisscrossed the ceiling. Its presence lingered, heavy and oppressive, like a storm cloud suspended over their heads. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by an awful silence that seemed louder than any sound. Emma pressed her back against the damp wall, her breathing shallow and ragged. She didn't want to look up. Somehow, she knew the spider was still there, watching, waiting. Mark took a careful step forward, sweeping his flashlight around the chamber. It landed on something strange, a circle of symbols, carved into the floor, half submerged beneath the water, pooling across the stone. "Emma," he said softly, "these markings, I think they're part of the house's foundation." She knelt beside him, brushing her fingers across the symbols. They felt old, older than the house itself, and yet they pulsed faintly under her touch, almost like a heartbeat, as if the house was alive, and these symbols were its veins. Suddenly, the spider's tapping resumed, faint and distant, coming from above. Emma whispered, "What if the spider isn't just in the house? What if it is the house?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't have to. The realization settled between them like a thick fog. The storm hadn't just brought the spider, it had awakened it. And now it was climbing again, through the walls, the floors, the very bones of their home. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. The moment the words left Emma's lips, a low groan rippled through the stone beneath them, like a shudder of something vast stirring in its sleep. The symbols at her feet glowed faintly for a brief second, just a flicker, but enough to send a jolt of panic through her spine. Mark stood frozen beside her, staring at the runes as if they might rearrange themselves into something legible. "It's breathing," he murmured. The chamber responded with a drip from above, thick, slow, and dark. It splattered on the stone near Emma's hand. She recoiled as the liquid spread like ink in water, staining the floor with a sickly shimmer. Mark touched the nearby wall. There's something inside it, moving, pressing out. They both looked up. Through the thick webbing above, the spider's long legs emerged again, slow and purposeful. But now it wasn't alone. Smaller shapes squirmed along the webbing. Dozens of them, hundreds, tiny spiders, their bodies barely larger than a fingernail, pouring like black water from the crevices, crawling across the walls and ceiling. Emma's scream lodged in her throat. The air was thick with the sound of skittering legs, a whispery chorus that surrounded them. "This isn't just one spider," she said, voice shaking. "It's an infestation. It's a hive." Mark grabbed her hand. "We have to leave now." They turned and ran, splashing through the shallow water toward the tunnel's entrance. But behind them, the tapping quickened. The spiders didn't chase. They watched, and from high above, the original spider remained still, head turned toward the fleeing figures, as if marking their every movement. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. They scrambled through the tunnel, their footsteps slapping against the stone and water sloshing around their ankles. The oppressive air seemed to follow them, thick with moisture and the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. Emma could feel them, crawling just out of reach, under her skin, in her mind. When they reached the basement steps, the storm's howl greeted them like a scream. The wind had grown more ferocious, slamming into the house as if trying to rip it from its foundation. Water was leaking in through the cracks in the concrete, slow streams winding across the floor like veins. Emma turned to Mark, breathless. "It's not just the tunnel. This thing has spread." Mark nodded grimly. "It's in the whole house, the attic, the walls, the drains." The word drains lingered between them. Emma's eyes widened. The nursery bathroom. They raced upstairs, their bodies stiff with fear and cold. The power was still out, but the flickering flashlight cast enough light to show them what they didn't want to see. The house had changed. The wallpaper was curling at the edges, soaked and peeling back like dead skin. From behind the walls, muffled skittering echoed like distant whispers. Long, thin cracks had appeared in the ceiling, and black webbing now lined the corners of every room. Thin, but dense, glistening with damp. As they reached the hallway, they froze. The door to Lily's nursery was ajar, creaking slightly with each sway of the house. A thin trail of water trickled from the bathroom down the hall, but it wasn't clear or clean. It was cloudy, murky, tinged with something darker. Mark pushed the door open. The crib was empty. The bathroom door across the room was wide open. From inside came the now familiar sound, soft, deliberate tapping. It was slow, measured, patient. Emma stepped forward, whispering her daughter's name. "Lily." There was no answer, only the sound of something still climbing. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing. Emma stepped into the nursery, with Mark close behind, his grip tight on her shoulder. The room once filled with warmth and lullabies, now felt hollow, gutted by something ancient and cruel. Stuffed animals lay toppled across the floor, their glassy eyes reflecting the dim light with lifeless stares. The mobile above the crib spun lazily, creaking with each rotation despite the still air. The trail of water led directly to the bathroom. It shimmered under the flashlight like oil on pavement, and every droplet carried the sour scent of rot. Emma's hand trembled as she reached for the bathroom door frame. She paused, half afraid of what lay beyond, half terrified of not knowing. Mark leaned in and whispered, "We don't have to go in." "Yes, we do," she said. "She might still be in there." Together, they stepped over the threshold. The bathroom looked as though it had been untouched for days, but not by time, by something else. The mirror above the sink was cracked, its centre smeared with a dark streak, as though something had been dragged across it. The tub was full, not of water, but of that same cloudy, silted flood that now infected the whole house. Emma inched closer, holding her breath as she peered into the bathtub. Floating on the surface was Lily's favourite toy, Mr. Hops, a once white rabbit, now soaked and grey, but no sign of Lily. Mark's light scanned toward the floor drain. The webbing had grown out of it, spilling in strands across the tiles, down into the water, up along the sink's plumbing. It wasn't just in the house, it was using the house, spreading through every pipe, every passage, every space in between. A skittering noise came from behind the toilet, soft and urgent, like something brushing the wall. Emma turned the flashlight, and there, just for a second, she saw a small footprint on the wet tile. Lily had been here. Mark knelt beside the drain, examining the web strands. "They're pulsing," he whispered, and they were. The threads were moving, rhythmic, alive, like nerves twitching in anticipation, or leading somewhere. Emma's skin prickled with realization. She's not just missing, she's been taken, pulled in. Mark looked at her, pale, into the walls. Emma nodded. Into the house. Outside, thunder cracked. The walls groaned, and beneath it all, the tapping resumed, slow, insistent. The Itsy Bitsy spider was still climbing,